At the dawn of time, compact computing was the domain of streaming media and very light workloads. No one associated these pint-sized PCs with AAA gaming, video editing, or any other intensive task. With the start of a new decade upon us, is it finally time for small form factor computers to enter the mainstream, or will they forever be relegated to niche status? So, to celebrate the start of 2021, I decided to try and build one of these Mini-ITX PCs and see what the experience is like and what performance we can get in such a small package. At the same time, I also wanted to keep the price at an affordable level, and that's why we'll be going with a mix of new and secondhand parts. For the case, we have a Silverstone RVZ02B that can be found for about $100 new, a Corsair 450 watt SFX type power supply for another $100. Then there's the motherboard, which is a BioStar X370 GTN for $50 second hand, and it will house a Ryzen 2600 CPU for around $100, also second hand. For RAM, I went with an 8 GB kit from Patriot for $47 new, and for storage, we have a combo of a Samsung NVMe SSD at $100 and a Western Digital hard drive for $69, also new. And no, I'm not making this up. Lastly, we have the video card, which is a NVIDIA GeForce 970 GTX that can be found secondhand for about $100. Adding all this up, we get a very worrying total price of $666. And I'm starting to think that maybe this build idea wasn't such a good one. But whatever, let's put this thing together and see if it blows up. First step when building a new PC is to prep the computer case. So I'm removing both side panels, undoing any internal cables, and setting aside any manuals or accessory boxes that were hidden within. Make sure to keep the manual at arm's reach, especially for a Mini-ITX build, since each small form factor case is bound to come with some sort of installation quirks. So you need to reference that manual quite frequently because of that. As for the particular case I'm using, namely the Silverstone RVZ02B, or as I like to call it, the Raven, because it says so right on the front, I chose it mostly because I like the way it looks. There's just something about this micro tower or console-like form factor that I find very appealing. It can sit either vertically or horizontally, it won't look out of place on a desk or in an entertainment center, and the build quality is quite good. Though, to be fair, this is kind of an old model, so you may have trouble finding it in stock. Next up is the power supply, and I went with the SF450 from Corsair. This is a SFX style power supply, so it takes up less space than a traditional ATX one. Also, it's fully modular, it's rated at 80 plus gold efficiency, and for the parts in this build, 450 watts is more than enough. Actually, this is the first PSU that I bought from Corsair, and I have to say I am impressed. The cables and the unit both come in these nice felt baggies. Also, it's got a nice weight to it, and all the materials feel very premium. I don't think I've ever been so impressed by something as simple as a power supply. To install the PSU, I first need to secure it to the case with 4 screws and then connect the pass-through power cable to it. This cable actually routes to the back top of the case as the power supply sits in the bottom front. Now, you may notice that I made a mistake here of mounting it with the fan facing towards the inside of the case, which would have caused some intake restriction and potential overheating. I guess that's the magic price point starting to haunt this build. But don't worry, I caught this issue in time and I fixed it for the final tests. Okay, so almost done with the PSU now. All that's left is to connect the modular cables for it. So we'll be using the 24-pin ATX one, the CPU power one, the PC Express power one, and the SATA power. Everything else will stay in the box for now. Moving on to internals now. First, I'm unboxing the BioStar X370 GTN motherboard. This was the cheapest AM4 Mini-ITX board that I could find locally, and while BioStar might not be considered a top-tier manufacturer, I've had components from them in the past. They lasted for years without issues, so I think it should work just fine. On the back of the board, there's a M.2 slot in which I'll install the Samsung 970 EVO SSD. Samsung's been making excellent SSDs for years now, so there's no way you can go wrong with them. Once that's done, I'll flip the board back around and I'll slot in the RAM, after which we'll be ready to move on to the CPU. Speaking of CPU, I am using the AMD Ryzen 2600, which is a mid-range processor from a couple of years ago that still packs a punch to this day and is a really good deal at around $100 secondhand. You can find these readily available on eBay, AliExpress, or the like. To install it, first I need to remove two plastic brackets from the motherboard. This is unusual to me because you're removing stuff from the motherboard in order to install a stock cooler, and I just don't think that's natural. It should just go on there without any prep work, but whatever. I remove them, then I make sure to align the teeny tiny triangle on the CPU socket with a golden triangle on the processor. Once I got the alignment, I lift up the retention arm, I place the processor, I close the arm, then I place the included cooler above it and screw it in. Lastly, important not to forget, I connect the cooler fan to the motherboard and tie its cable so it's nice and pretty. The motherboard assembly is now ready to install. But before I do that, it's really important to poke and bend backward all of the tiny metal pieces on the I/O shield so that they'll not short out any ports on the motherboard. Such is the life when you're going with lower tier manufacturers, but it's a small price to pay in order to pay a small price. Next up, I secure the board in place with 4 screws and I can start connecting stuff to it. The front panel headers are usually the most tricky to get right, so I start with them. Then I move on to the front panel USB header, the audio connector, 24-pin ATX, and of course CPU power. Now I'm finally ready to connect the graphics card, and this is where we encounter one of those quirks I was talking about at the beginning. Unlike in a traditional case, the GPU doesn't slot in directly to the motherboard. Instead, I need to install an L bracket that routes the PCI Express connector to a separate chamber in the case. This is a nice feature since it means that whatever GPU I'll end up using, it won't heat up the rest of the components when it's under load, which is super important since everything's so tightly packed. Moving on to the other side of the case, one more bracket needs to go in and I can finally install the GTX 970. Even though this is a 6-year-old card, it has no issues with playing games at 1080p or even 1440p with medium settings, and you can usually find one secondhand for around $100. I'd say the 970 has been a good deal ever since it came out, and I'm happy to keep on using it for a few more years. Before we go on, you may have noticed that there's some extra empty space left right next to the video card. While I was building this system, it seemed like a terrific idea to put a mechanical hard drive right next to the GPU. And oddly enough, the case actually supports this scenario. There's screw holes and a cutout for SATA cables and everything. And as I was executing my crazy plan, I noticed the SATA power connector was being blocked by the power supply cable. I had to fix it through what could be called unorthodox means, but something about it just didn't feel right. In the end, I came to my senses and didn't keep the Western Digital hard drive for the long term, which means the total price for this build will have to go down to a more sane $597. So yeah, apocalypse averted, Western Digital didn't die for our sins, peace on earth, etc., etc. Thank you, Western Digital. Okay, the build is now complete, and for whatever reason, I really like the whole components in plain sight look. So I've decided to keep the side panels off for now. If I did this with a full-sized PC, I wouldn't, it just wouldn't look right. It would look lazy or I don't know. But when everything's so tightly packed together, the overall look is kind of cool, kind of, I don't know. I don't know how to put it, but this thing looks like a brick of technology and I like it. But looks aside, is this thing quiet? Well, kinda. The stock AMD CPU cooler is very quiet, even under load. I'm actually impressed that AMD is somehow managed to ship such a like quiet cooler in the box for free. That's pretty nice. The GPU cooler, on the other hand, I mean, it's quiet and idle, but under load, it's a different story, and I'd say it's not pleasing to the ear. It's actually kind of annoying. So have a listen to these for yourself. Last thing I wanted to test is if this thing can game, and surprise surprise, it actually packs quite a punch. First up, I tested Forza Horizon 4 running at 1440p with high settings. I got a very respectable average frame rate of 83 using the built-in benchmark, and even in normal gameplay, this game runs quite well and I had no issues running it. It looks good, it's smooth, it's just overall a good experience. Moving on to Wolfenstein Youngblood, same as before, high settings, 1440p resolution. Here the average FPS was 69, again, not making this up. And anyways, the GTX 970, yeah, it's doing really well in 2021, and I'm happy I chose it for this build. But that's it for this video. I managed to put together a very capable Mini-ITX PC for a decent price, and yeah, at this point in time, it's getting harder and harder to find reasons to go with a full-sized ATX build when you can get basically the same stuff in a smaller package with almost no compromises. But what do you think? Is Mini-ITX the future? Let me know in the comments below. Give this video a like if you found it enjoyable, consider subscribing, and I'll catch you in the next one.